Okay.
Sounds great. Yeah, should we get started or should we wait
Yeah, let's
for
do it.
Marty?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. Awesome.
I'll share.
So
I'll go ahead and share. Go for it.
I think we're a small enough community that everyone understands that all of us are working at the speed of light. So apologies if this appears rushed, but welcome everyone to our CDIM town hall on discussing the implications of the AAMC's supplemental ERAS application, which we all know was very, very new this past academic year, but we're looking forward to academic year 22-23. Our intent here is to talk a little bit about the data that the AAMC has provided, but the CDIM leadership would love to get input from our clerkship director community. So that's why we're here. So we'll spend most of the time, I think, Dr. Munz, with asking the community how they have perceived the process to have gone in the past year and what they hope from the future. So our agenda is maybe spending less than 10-15 minutes on the background and overview of the ERAS application. And then we'll spend a majority of the time, Dr. Munz, and I see Dr. Abraham is here as well to gather feedback. Next slide, please. So introductions, disclosures, and conflict of interest, I feel we always have to do that, right? So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I am Launika Sood. I am a clerkship director and oversee internal medicine over the 4 years at a new MD program in Washington State at Washington State University. The reason I'm here today is I had the pleasure, along with one of our program director colleagues, to sit in on a longitudinal sort of focus group with the AAMC, along with members from from general surgery and dermatology and other stakeholders, as they sort of debriefed and digested the evaluation data that was coming in from the pilot. So that's why I have a little bit of sort of behind the scenes information that I'm happy to share as is available to us. I have no conflicts of interest. I'm not getting paid by CDIM, AIM, or the AAMC, and so I have no stake in the matter, except just like all of us here, just want what is best for our students and our residency program. So happy to provide any kind of perspectives there. Marty, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm Marty Muntz. I'm the president of CDIM, and my only disclosure here, like Launika, is that I want to make sure that we are properly representing the voice of our clerkship director membership when I go with our president-elect, Dr. Abraham, our past president, Dr. Shaheen, to the board meeting for AIM and help craft an internal medicine-wide letter of intent to the AAMC on whether or not we're participating going forward. And then I can just go real quick with the next slide. This is just the outline of the timing. And I know it sounds rushed to everybody, but believe me, we find out that we're going to be giving a letter of intent. It's due at the end of the month. We've got to try to wrangle all of our constituent groups to kind of hear the voice of everyone. And so that's why this seems rushed. But we have to deliver a letter of intent to AAMC by the end of the month. And then we have to decide on the number of preference signals by the end of March. So the timeline is tight. And I'm going to put these questions in the chat so everybody can see them when we move on to the next slide. But what we're really going to, at the end, try to do is gather everyone's voice. You can put it in the chat. You can say it out loud when we're at the end of the quick intro talk here. But we're going to try to gather all of this information from the group. You can put it, do it today. You can do it on the listserv, but I really need it back by Sunday evening, even though, again, that timeline is tight because we need to have these conversations with the AIM board and move forward as an internal medicine community here. And I'll let, go ahead, Launika.
So I'm going to ask for forgiveness because I prepared, of course, like a fantastic faculty member that I am, way too many slides for way too less time. So what I'm going to try and do is highlight only what is unfortunately going to be coming across a little biased because I'm going to pick and choose what I want to say on some of these slides. But this is going to be recorded and will be available to all of you and others who couldn't join us. So just very quickly, the AAMC conducted this pilot last year, and the purpose was for them to update the ERAS application process, to empower applicants to share information in a fair, equitable way, and to drive holistic review as far as residency program recruitment was concerned. So as you all have seen and gone through the advising process, the application has three big components divided into past experiences, geographic preferences, and then preference signaling. The one thing is general surgery that also went through this process did not ask for geographic preferences this past year. Next slide, please. So we had 64 residency programs in internal medicine, categorical programs that participated this past year, and 75% of prelim programs. And then on the applicant side in internal medicine, a majority of IM-bound applicants, both categorical and prelim, participated within the supplementary ERAS application. I was very appreciative of the fact that the AAMC was transparent, at least for those of us on the focus group, and thereafter with their evaluation methodology. They conducted quite a few focus groups, surveys of different stakeholders, and have conducted webinars throughout the year. So the entirety of this of our conversation today will be including data and statistics that they have just released, and it'll be coming on their program website on the AAMC. But we can certainly share that executive summary with you all. So very briefly, again, this is the cherry picking of the past experiences. As you all know, it was divided into two components. So applicants had to, in a very, very defined space, share up to 5 meaningful experiences and short essays. Applicants felt that, some of them felt that it empowered them to highlight who they were. Program directors were mixed with those reactions because they felt like some of that information was redundant and could be found in other parts of the application. However, most of the program directors did feel that it added to the initial applicant review and when they were deciding whom to interview. As far as the second component of the past experiences, impactful life experience essay, there was a majority of the applicants actually responded to this question, and most of them talked about financial hardship, serious life challenges, and their status as first-generation medical students. On the internal medicine side, which is quite different from the other specialties, minority of program directors reported that this was important, this provided important context, perhaps going back to the redundancy with the rest of the application. So in the new academic year, the AAMC does propose that they will try to streamline this section by reducing the number of questions and the response options to provide what is most value to programs. And also because applicants were confused what was asked of them, to make it fair and equitable, they also plan to focus efforts on improving the guidance to applicants and advisors. As far as geographic preferences were concerned, there were two big components. One was the geographic division. So applicants had up to 3 geographic divisions according to the US Census Bureau that they could choose. Most applicants did have at least one geographic division preference, whereas a third actually did not have a preference. And these were typically applicants who identified as Black, Hispanic, or were international medical graduates. And then a majority of applicants did provide a short essay explaining their preferences. The rural and urban question was I think quite fraught and confusing both on the program director as well as the applicant side. But it seems like most applicants didn't have a preference, or and then when they did have a preference, they chose urban over rural. So in the new academic year, the AAMC is proposing to change the number and groups of division and modify the format of the rural and urban setting of the question. The last component is the preference signaling. And so as far as from the applicant's perspective, as you all know, categorical and prelim bound applicants could choose up to 5 programs each. Surprisingly, 1/3 of prelim bound applicants didn't send any signals, but the rest did, to the most number of signals they could provide. And they said that the top factors that they considered were alignment of the program strengths with career interests, location of or geographic preferences, and strength of the program's clinical training. On the flip side, just back one slide, Marty. Thank you. Program directors really felt that this helped them identify applicants they would have otherwise overlooked, which was surprising to me, but reassuring. But a lot of program directors did say that they use the preference signals in their holistic review process, or as a tiebreaker for deciding whom to interview. So general key survey points, applicants, just as far as the applicant advisor sort of school, triad or dyad was concerned, only 50% applicants felt that they had a chance to talk to their advisors. And perhaps this was a function of sort of being rushed. And then more than 70% prepared responses in advance, and they spent over 3 hours. And I think a lot of us have been cognizant of the fact that it's been up to 5 hours for some of our applicants. Advisors said that most of them did use the resources provided by the AAMC and found those to be useful. They spent up to 3 hours advising students, which is not a short amount of time given the workload we have. And very few actually felt confident advising their applicants last year. And the top 3 questions from students were basically around the strategy for how to submit how to answer the questions and how it would be used by programs. So these are potential changes that the AAMC has already identified for any of the different specialties that choose to go on with the supplemental ERAS application this year. So they plan to go ahead with providing earlier preparation materials to applicants, participating programs, opening up invitations sooner than they did last year, being more deliberate about the functionality of the program director's dashboard. So exploring interface simplification, both for applicants, but as well as on the program side. And then choosing one close date for the supplemental app and the full ERAS app. This year, last year, as you know, it was on 2 different times, confusing students quite a bit. And then finally, immediate confirmation of email to applicant. Otherwise, it took a lot of time last year. So coming back to sort of our timeline here, I'll hand it over to Marty. One thing I will say over here is that internal medicine is not the only discipline that has been asked by the AAMC if they'd like to work on the supplemental ERAS application. A lot of other disciplines, as I understand, are also considering this with the same timeline afforded to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lanika, for that, and for service to CDIM and AIM for being a part of this longitudinal work group. It really kind of obviously pays off for the improvement of the program, but also then at times like these when we're forced to kind of make a quick turnaround and make decisions together. So, so again, these are our next steps. We want to have a discussion today about this, and then I put the post on the CDIM listserv today If you kind of get some thoughts out today and want to get more thoughts out later as you noodle on it a little bit, please feel free. If you feel like the listserv is too public and there's something that you'd rather not be for all eyes only, I'm happy to take emails on this from people or set up or chat with you by phone as well. And I know the timeline is way too short, but if we're gonna present to the board on Monday, then I've got to have everything back by Sunday night so I can finish watching the Super Bowl and the commercials, and then put some stuff together so we can have a good conversation on Monday. And then we're looking to have a joint recommendation. Again, this is not just a CDIM recommendation, but really all of the constituent groups. But obviously this affects especially CDIM and APTIM. And so we're going to have to really get together with our program director colleagues and really come up with one recommendation to the board about how to address this year. And again, these questions are in the chat, so maybe it's easiest if I stop sharing so we can maybe see each other's faces and everything here. There we are. And I know there are some things in the chat, but and I know we're a small enough group, there's only 25 of us or so. So if you just want to unmute and give thoughts, and I'll try to keep us on time, but what are everybody's thoughts here?
So I had already put my comments in the chat room, but I will just say that the process of filling out ERAS applications is incredibly stressful for students just in general. It's a horrible time for them. And the unknown of the supplemental application was just this incredible added stress that, the stress of, do I fill it out? It's optional, or do I have to do it? And so the students really struggled with whether it was going to help them or hurt them. And then the added time of having to fill them out, and then not wanting to be redundant in answering questions and having it have added value, but then having a really limited space. And were they going to be harmed if they only answered 3 of the questions instead of 5? Across the board, students really struggled with this. It might just be my school, but I can't tell you the number of frantic phone calls I got in October saying, my 3 programs that I signal preferenced, I didn't get interviews at. But they were getting them everywhere else. It was almost like they weren't getting interviews, and it was kind of backfiring on them. I don't know what added value there is. And I feel that if 82% of students are participating, right? And when it's optional, by making, if ERAS wants to know certain questions, then instead of having a supplemental application, pick 3 questions and have it be part of the traditional ERAS and not have something extra, and don't have it optional. This way, if all students have to do it, all students have to do it. At least you're taking away the angst of that decision away from the students.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, well, I don't want to say many of us, but I know I feel a lot of what you're saying and agree with you, especially the part about making this a part of the application and why is this separate. And I know they want to study it as an add-on here, so they want to make sure that things are value added rather than look at the whole application in general. Sometimes it's easier to do that. I agree. I had frantic phone calls. I had lots of one-on-one meetings. I had students worrying about word choice in a 500-word essay about whether this word or that word would be okay. It was kind of unnecessarily stressful. So, what about other thoughts? I see in the chat here too, Lisa. Do you want to talk about the focus groups that you all ran?
Sure. I am just like, Marty, you're blowing my mind as usual, where you're like, we're going to approach this as perhaps we could not have to do this, which is just like, what? And I agree with Janet, where it's like, either make it happen or don't make it happen. Like, either everyone does it, every program does it, because that just adds the angst. So When this first came out, my students, like all of your students, completely lost their minds. And we ran 3 different 2-hour focus groups with the students, with small groups of students, to go through every single one of these questions, to have discussions of, what do you think they mean by meaningful experiences? What do you think this piece means? And I did find with my students, my underrepresented minority students, and my first generation students, first generation physician students, they really found those meaningful experiences powerful because they could really speak to those directly. But other students definitely struggled, and they definitely were like, I'm replicating data that's already in my application. So do I have to make up other experiences so that I'm doing 2 different things? And so it was, as everybody else says, it was an angsty time. And we had the same thing, Marty, where it was like, do you think this word is better or is this word better? I have 502 words. Do you think they're going to reject the whole thing if it's 502? So I think it's great that this body, as usual, is doing remarkable things.
Thanks, Lisa. Chris, I think Chris Knight has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. And Veronica, sorry if I missed this in the survey, but did anyone ask whether or not the students had an impression as to whether or not this was helpful for them? Or are we going to wait until match day to ask that? Because that's what I would most want to know, is did the students actually feel like it helped?
Again, Chris, I didn't do any of the evaluations, so I can't claim to know all the data. I was going to actually drop the executive summary in the chat, but I can certainly look through and highlight that question if I can find it. But I agree that would be an important question.
Okay.
I would just say also that there was loads of data, and we kind of, like Lanika said earlier, we had to pick and choose. So the data presentation didn't go for an hour because we want everybody to have a chance to talk. But I think the point you make, Chris, is a really good one, is that how can you possibly know, how can our students really be asked if it was helpful until they have the full experience of match in addition to this sort of thing, right? So most of the questions were about how much time did they spend, whether they were giving truthful information, what sort of things did they write about, and all that sort of thing. And it wasn't about, would you do it again if you had the chance or anything like that.
And the reason I bring it up is because I share everyone else's opinions and feedback about how this felt very burdensome for the students that I talked to, and how they certainly felt compelled to do it. So I would love to hear if in retrospect, I guess, if they thought that it added value, because if they did, honestly, maybe there's something to talk about here. But all that we have is kind of the introspective look of, oh, we have to do this thing on short notice and we don't really know what it is, and oh, no one else does either.
Yeah, I mean, how can you be expected to respond by the end of the month before match day has even occurred? I tend to think that if students match in programs that they preference signaled, then they're going to be happy with the process. And if they did, then they're not.
Marty, yeah, this is Dan. I'm going to take back my letter of recommendation from you. Anyway.
Dan wrote a letter of recommendation when I went up for promotion several years ago, and I'm always deeply indebted to him.
Well, I'm replacing that letter of recommendation. I'm putting another letter in for Marty.
Anyway, the big question we had when we met today was most of the faculty felt that some of the questions that were asked, there's not a chance in the world that they would be able to answer it. And I'm Rich, and I had a student for 6 weeks, and I guarantee you a lot of those things about how quickly did they respond and all that were just not obviously not evaluated. But even when I talked to the hospitals, I said, could you evaluate this accurately? And they said, no, I mean, we really couldn't. So anyway, I want to know how that came about in terms of those specific things, in terms of where they tested to see what percentage of people really felt they could, evaluate that specific activity, et cetera.
Dan, I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. are you asking about the standardized evaluation letter, or are you asking
Yes.
about the so this town hall today is on the
Okay.
supplemental application that the students complete, not anything about evaluation
Okay,
letters.
my
But
apologies.
that's okay. No, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you'd be a good person to connect with would be Rini, and I know both of you. If you haven't had a chance to meet, you'd really enjoy each other's chatting. So Rini is leading that task force for AIM along with Susan Lane from Acton.
Okay.
Sorry,
Again,
and my camera's off because I'm having to spend my time in 2 different places. So I didn't catch all of that, but love to talk to anybody.
So just to add on to what Chris said about it being kind of a weird time to ask us what we think about this or what our students thought about it, I have to say it is strange. I mean, I pretty much know which programs our students are going to get interviews at based on their files, like how many honors they have and where their steps are and all that after years of doing this. But the weird thing about this experiment was that, generally speaking, they were using the signaling preference for programs that were either slightly above reach or very reach for them. The problem was that a bunch of the big programs, particularly on the West Coast, were not involved in the experiment. So they couldn't use that signaling preference for those programs, and they therefore don't know whether it would have made any difference. So it's sort of like a half-baked experiment. It's like, did it really make a difference for our students? I mean, I've talked to a few program directors, and this is pure anecdote, who said they didn't know what to make of the fact that they had to go into 2 different places to look for the information or what to do with it. Now, I think it is compelling that we have real data there that we've been provided, and I think that's super helpful. But I just think it's kind of a little bit weird to ask what we think about this thing that not every program was involved in, as was stated earlier.
It's a really good point that you all are bringing up. But I don't know the minds of everyone on the AAMC side, but I do know that some of the feedback that they got from us right immediately was, you can't just throw this at us in August or July and expect us to do a good job with it. And so now they're asking us early so they can get a commitment from us, so they can give us a bunch of information earlier. And we're saying, we don't know all the information yet. And so you have to wait and ask us. And so there's a needle threading thing here that hasn't been done perfectly, but I see why they're trying to do everything earlier this year, because we told them it was too rushed last year.
I think also we don't know how the programs are going to use this data for ranking. So, and I'm sure the programs themselves don't know how they're going to use this data for ranking. I had heard someone, it was in the chat or something, where they were using it for interviews as the tiebreaker. And I've heard that from a few other programs directors, that they were using it as a tiebreaker. And is that beneficial, especially if students are genuinely interested, but they're throwing it in, as Paul was saying, where it's the most competitive programs that they're preference signaling, because they're like, hey, I'll throw my hat in the ring. So I think it's again, just piling onto this whole thing of like, we don't know what the programs are going to do in terms of ranking either. They might end up using this data to rank as well.
I think ENT shared their experience, and I can't remember, but I want to say that most didn't use it in the ranking. Does anybody know what ENT shared? Don't remember. I think Craig has a comment or question.
Well, the chair has to invite me to just.
I can't see people's raising their hands here, so thanks, Rini.
So thanks, everybody. I just wanted to comment that I would encourage people to also think about what I would call the macro view of the question on the table. So, we're internists, so we always tend to dive into the details. But the setting, the setting that we're in is everybody's complaining. residency directors are complaining, clerkship directors are complaining, students are complaining. Everybody's overwhelmed by applications. So everything in the system is stressed. And so, you know, we've been basically then beating on these various organizations to say, you got to do something about this. And so, you know, this experiment of the supplementary application was basically came from a lot of pressure from people like us on ERAS to see what they could do to try to deal with application inflation and provide information that allowed a more holistic review. And therefore, to be able to find a better match between a student and the residency program. And you know, this is such a complicated area that if you're going to make any progress in an area like this, it's going to have to be incremental. You're not going to be able to design some experiment or some intervention that's going to, in one fell swoop, solve everything. So I think the real question on the table is at least in my mind, and you know, this is an N of one expressing their opinion. I think the real question is whether or not, you know, ERAS is trying to make a good faith effort to work with the internal medicine community and these other disciplines to try to improve the system. And you can't necessarily look at what that is in a snapshot today, but where it might end up by doing experiments and refining those experiments as you go along. Is there a cost to that? Sure, there's a cost to that. You've heard about it, angst, time. But I would submit, I'm not sure that you can get any place without a cost like that.
Thanks for that, Craig. And the other thing, just to piggyback on that a little bit, we've all, I mean, there's a reason you all are in this organization and our clerkship directors and are on this call. You're innovators, you're leaders at your place, and you all know that the first time you do something is going to be the worst time it happens, right? So every year it's going to get a little bit better. So if there are redeeming qualities to this idea, this process, then we should try to help point out what those things are, try to help point out the things that could have been done better, and how we can, you know, suggest improvements as part of this community going forward. It will be better this coming year just because we've had a year of experience with it, and we'll have more time to prepare for it and think about how we're going to advise our students. Yeah.
I'm a guest here. I work with my awesome colleague Lonica, and just wanted to share one of the things about the application services is they're slow to change. ERAS has not drastically changed in a long time. I work a lot with the AMCAS system, which is also very slow to change, but AMCAS is way more robust than the ERAS application is in terms of the data collected from applicants. So I'm a national expert in holistic review. It's difficult to implement holistic review thoughtfully with ERAS as it stands. So the supplemental is a really good opportunity for students to be able to share meaningful information about their backgrounds and life that could assist with holistic review. So I'm obviously in the favor of it. I also oversee UME admissions. All of us have secondaries. We've been using secondaries for decades. So I'm used to the concept of it, and they're all different. So our students are also used to completing secondaries. If they applied to 20 medical schools when they applied to UME, they completed likely 20 different secondaries. So I do think it's a useful tool. But I think what's missing here is programs need to be more transparent about how they use the information. What about it is meaningful to them? Because we're all sort of guessing. Students are guessing, we're guessing. And until programs are more transparent about how they make decisions and how the supplemental assists that, we're going to continue to be in that space.
Thanks for that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Foster from FAU. I'm a clerkship director and the director of the Year 3 curriculum at my institution. So I agree with everything that's been said here. I do feel like it's a step in the right direction, moving us to a more holistic review of applicants. But I feel like we're in that weird, awkward, pubescent stage of it where it's like we're doing all this stuff, and what is going to be like the nice, happy medium between providing, opportunity for more holistic review of our students, but also not being incredibly burdensome to the program directors, who have thousands of applications to review. So I do agree with it. I think it's a step in the right direction. My students and my school is very small. I have an N of 64 a year graduating. And so I think this year I had 8 applying to internal medicine, and all of them said that it was just the preference signaling that was the most helpful to them. The part of this where I started to get concerned was now we are starting our year 4 lottery process for my current year 3s. And so we have this event called Visioning Night, and the M4s come back. The M4s who are applying to internal medicine talk to the students in year 3 who want to apply to internal medicine. And the 4th year students were saying, oh guys, make sure you have an easy rotation when it's ERAS application time, because you're going to spend so much time on your ERAS application and on the supplemental. You really want to make sure you take it easy, and give yourself some time. And so that kind of concerned me, because now it's having these downstream effects where they feel like they have to have easier rotations in year 4, just so that they can actually do a good job on the application. So that's where I feel like we still need to obviously fine tune this and get the data to make this a less stressful process for our students.
Thanks, Jen. That's uncomfortable silence. I'm good with that usually with students, but I see a lot of stuff in the chat about that's concentrating about the written questions, the essay part, past experiences. Does it overlap with, the personal statement? And then Jen's point about everybody making sure that they have an easy rotation so they have plenty of time to work on this sort of stuff. So something seems to be there, a signal seems to be there about students are spending too much time writing all of these things all together and preparing their application. I would presume, although I don't want to, it's happening tonight, I would presume that the APTIM group is going to say something similar. They're going to say, it took just too long to read all this stuff. I didn't have time to read all of it. So if there's a way for us to kind of consolidate or shorten some of the essay writing, does that sound like a reasonable thing that we could try to convey? I'm not sure it's going to happen this year, but is that a message that this group that resonates with this group?
I think asking, from an essay, what are the 2 or 3 things you want to know that are helpful in your selection process? Because to me, if you put a sheet of paper or a box in front of a student, they will fill up every single character of it. So I think, us being more intentional.
And I think, I totally agree. I think Rini and others, I think that's what the AAMC is wanting to know, as well as, is it useful and is it redundant? And I think they heard it loud and clear. And as far as the preparation timeline, I posted it in the chat in sort of that large executive summary. They've included having these questions available to applicants way in advance, April to May. So you have enough time, and providing applicants with sort of not a template necessarily, but with sort of guiding questions of, what you should and should not include perhaps. But I think it would be great for AIM to give a joint statement to them on what's important to both sides of our application process.
I've thought about what Lisa put in the chat too. And to earlier too, I think the issue that some of our students had is if you don't have every program participating. I mean, I know there were some schools that really got a lot, but because, you know, before people were looking, they would like, oh, I'm going to send my signals to these schools. And I'm like, well, 2 or 3 of them are not participating. So you got to pick 2 others. So it wasn't really a true indication of their top 5 programs. It was their top 5 that were available to choose and to signal.
Paul put something in the chat earlier too about if this is a progression, then all in would be a good next step for programs.
What I found really interesting about signaling, I'm Hannah Ravery from Temple University. What I found really interesting about signaling for my students is I guess I sort of wondered ahead of time if it would cut down on the students' sort of urge to want to communicate with programs after they applied, and it really didn't, at least for us. And if anything, it was sort of more, I was surprised with many of our students actually who still didn't end up getting interviews right away from places they had signaled. And I don't know that that was just program directors learning how to use this as well or what. But I was, I guess maybe disappointed that if we were going to do that sort of stress and aspect of all of this, at least for my students, didn't seem to get better. If anything, it felt even worse this year than before. I don't know if that was what other people's experience was with the urge to communicate outside of this application.
Thanks, Hannah. I found it interesting that the program director said that they used that part of it. I know, so it seems like we're kind of moving off the written parts, the essay parts. So we can talk a little bit more about the signal preferencing. Maybe the program director said that they used it, and they used it specifically to offer interviews and to help them decide if they have limited spaces, who they would interview. I think just to Lisa's point, the more signals that we give to students, the less that program directors can trust that it's a real meaningful indication of, yes, this student really likes my program. So if we had 20, I know we're not talking about 20, but if we had that many signal preferences, then program directors would probably, I would assume, if I were a program director, I would not care about it so much. But if it's only 5, the student has only 5 to give. They gave 1 to my program, and so that is useful for me.
And I think, Marty, going back to, I think, Paul and what Greenie brought up, right? Like about sort of the preference signals and how they're used, how students kind of, if all programs are not bought in, then that number may be, the student may be reaching out to programs that are 15th on their list, but still those count as being strongly connecting with the program. So I agree. I mean, I think, I don't know the answer to this, but if it's not a pilot anymore, should we, if AIM decides, should it be all in or not?
And that data will affect match, right? Like if you weren't able to signal all your programs, it wasn't, your favorite to begin with. I don't know, it'll be hard to look at that data too.
I have to say, I haven't been asking, so we're doing the rank order list meetings with the students, and I have not even thought to ask them about that, because it seems like this bad memory of kind of flailing my way through it. Because I'm amazed, Lisa, you could do 3 2-hour sessions, because I didn't know what to tell them even. And I went to the webinars and all that. I just wasn't sure how to use this whole tool. And so I haven't thought to ask them what they thought of it. because now it's just like, what did they think of the programs that they interviewed at? But I have a few more students to meet with. I'll definitely ask them, but I have a feeling they're not going to know like what they thought of it, other than it was a lot more work to fill it out, any more than we really know what we think of it, because we haven't gone through the match with it. So.
We basically just like, what it was helpful was to see, as Craig was talking about, like a more macro view of what the supplement look like. So it's like, here's this piece, here's this piece, here's this piece. How do all of these pieces fit together in a holistic way? And then just like spitballing with the students. What do you think, what would you think of as your most significant experience? And why is that your most significant experience? And why is that meaningful to you? And sort of just hashing it all out verbally, I think helped our students feel slightly more confident going into it, that there was a consensus that like, this is what we think they mean. But I agree. And also like, you know, it's brand new and it's obviously not going to be perfect. And I think there's pros and cons, and we don't want to, you know, to use a horrible expression, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think there's definitely scope for improvement. And as I said in the chat, doing the program signaling completely flatlined our need to reach out to programs to get students interviews. Like that, we did not do any reach outs, and students did not send any emails to programs saying, I'd really like you to interview me. So that maybe is a bonus. It's not stopping their letters of intent now to match into the program, but it definitely flatlined the first piece.
Yeah, we didn't, that question wasn't asked, right? Did your email inbox decrease, volume decrease? Because I will say for wellness, that would be nice.
I think it probably depends. I mean, still, this is pretty individualized for students, and thinking about all students as one type of student isn't great. So, I mean, I still had a fair amount of students that were, you know, just historically, if you look at their application, you think, eek, I'm worried about this for you. They still did a lot of outreaching, and they still had a lot of asking questions. And so. What about the geographic stuff?
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of meh. Same thing, Rini, for us. I had a couple students who are originally from the West Coast, from California, and being in Florida, I think that was helpful. They kind of did the double like geographic signaling, and then I'm gonna preference signal 5 programs in LA. Like I think that helped, but that's like 1 or 2 students. Yeah, I don't know that that was really, I don't know that it really helped.
It actually concerned me for some of my students. They like got really stressed out about, should I rethink where I'm applying, because I'm really like, I'm interested in this one program in Chicago, but I'm on the East Coast. And so that's like 3 different areas. And so I was concerned that it was causing them to be getting to factor in things that they shouldn't be thinking about. Even though the attention was still trying to narrow to places where they truly were interested in going.
To me, that information, if there's a geographic preference, it's usually because of something very specific, not like, oh, I just really want to live in the Northeast. I've always wanted to live in the Northeast. It was usually like, I have a family reason, and so to me, we can't have the expectation there's going to be no reach out to programs. And to me, that's something personal that you can reach out to a program. But I don't know that it helped with like geographic signaling. And plus the geography was weird also. It's like, you know, the South. I mean, I don't even like I don't know. That's my personal opinion. Does not represent the opinion of AIM.
I know they said that they're gonna somehow adjust those regions. I don't know what that means. So I'm sure there's always going to be a thing like there was for us this year. Wisconsin and Minnesota were in different regions. You know, we're right next door. So, you know, there always has to be some sort of, you know, change from one to another that occurs there. If I just put on my program director hat though, for a second, which I've never been a program director, so I'm just wearing a costume for this part. Program directors might say that if you have students put their geographic preferences in a place that it's their geographic preference that goes to all programs, then they're not able to call to say, well, I have some family thing here, and then call a different program in a different region. Say, I have some family thing here, I have some family thing here, I have some family thing here, and spread it all around. They have to kind of say where their family thing is, and then that goes for all programs in that region. And they don't get to call places in every region and say I have a family reason to come there. I don't know if that's a real thing, but Paul, your point is great. I mean, I think working with AppDim now that we'll have more lead-in time is going to be really important if we're going to choose together to participate in this thing, to really kind of give us ideas on how we can best advise students. And then we can do things like Lisa did, which is, we can put together some guidelines on how to tell your students about this sort of thing for next year, and how to lead a 2-hour, session.
Marty, did you say Lisa would share with us the Zoom link for that 2-hour session? So
I think she has to now that she's said it. We
Oh, I'd be delighted. I would be delighted to bore you guys for 2 hours.
if we're able to give some feedback to AAMC, which we're in ongoing, conversation with them, to give feedback anyway. Are there things that we didn't bring up so far today that would be meaningful changes that would improve this process?
I feel like it's on the program site. I feel like we're still guessing about what programs do with information. So I feel like we've been calling for many years programs to be more transparent, but as we know, it causes students a ton of stress when programs are not transparent about how they use information. So I think because this is new, maybe a bigger call out to programs like how did you actually use this information? How would you plan to use it if it continues? Would be helpful, because I don't know that it's so much about, part of it I'm sure is about the makeup of the supplemental itself, but it's what causes the anxiety is how it's used, if it's used, what value does it have, and those are still all unknowns. And the people that have that information are not, I don't know, are they the ones being asked for feedback about this? Maybe they are, I'm not sure.
I think a little bit to that point too, one of my biggest concerns about the signaling, I think I put something in the chat about this, is just, is it used, if it's being used at all for ranking or to as a tiebreaker? To me, that just from the student perspective, that's not what the match is for. Like, this process is really supposed to be them ranking students on fit and the students ranking the programs on choice, and not about like how high the program directors will get on their list. And so I just am concerned. I don't know how to avoid that if we do have signaling, because I'm sure they'll remember, or maybe they could document it, but that's
right. Just to piggyback on that, Hannah, I mean, it'd be really unfair for a student's preferences in April to be taken into account on rank day. Does anybody have strong feelings about the preliminary piece to this? I mean, I think this has come up in discussions just around, even the idea about should we be writing cells for prelim applicants also. It's a lot of extra work. There's a huge number of students at some schools, and is this really useful for preliminary students to be doing, and for us to be advising them on this?
I also wonder about like the signaling, like preference signals for them or program signals for them, because it's just a lot harder to get to know where you'll get an interview at. We don't have great data for that. I don't know if other schools have great data. And so I feel there's just less spots. And so I feel like they have to apply to a little more places. And I feel like the game changes a lot quicker for prelim schools too. Like we used to have this many and now we only have this many. And so I just even feel like year to year, it's hard to advise those students on number of programs to apply to. And so I always feel like they just have to like apply more, which just feels terrible when you're telling somebody just to like apply to a million schools because you have no way to really advise them well. So I don't know if for them, and I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from prelim program directors if the signaling was helpful for them, because I think that's a very different story than for categorical program directors too.
I mean, it looks like we got about 3 minutes left, and I can stick around. I don't know if the call is just magically going to end at 4 o'clock here or anything, but does anybody feel ultra strong about a yes or no about whether we should be participating next year? Maybe if people can just drop that in the chat if they feel really strong one way or the other.
I'll just go out on a limb here. You said ultra strong. I don't know how on that scale of 1 to 3 how much I feel, but I feel like if we've committed to a pilot, like I feel like it's the clinicians and academicians that we should see it through, right? At least give it a 3 or 4 year try, because we already are on that steep learning curve with this. And I feel way more comfortable advising our students, sort of knowing what I know from last year.
I agree, but I just put in the plug again about as we continue that all programs and all students participate in it so we can get better data about who it's helping. I think that if it's used correctly, it'll help the programs screen more holistically. But the problem is there's a whole bunch of programs that didn't participate that we'll never know whether it would have helped them or not this year. So to abandon it now would seem kind of like a waste of a year of experiment, but plus we're experts now because we did a year.
Yeah, we're past that implementation gap now, so we can do better. We can do better now. We've got Lisa to be giving us a webinar on webinars, and okay. And I know we've had a lot of, but we've talked a little bit about both sides about those written essays. I was, you know, coming into today, my bias was ditching the supplemental essays or cutting them way back and keeping the other stuff. But I mean, Layla, you made a great point about the you know, there might be some benefits from that. I'll be interested to hear what the program directors have to say about how onerous it was to be reading through all of this sort of stuff, and maybe if the best way is that we can, going forward, we can try to avoid redundancy and reduce the amount of all of this sort of stuff that crosses both the ERAS application and the supplemental app. Well, it's 4 o'clock, and please just remember there's a thread now started on the listserv if you've got more stuff that you want to say, or please feel free to reach out to me directly if you'd rather. And I'm happy to chat and send you my phone number. We can talk even if that's easier too. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining and for engaging throughout today. It's been great.
Is the list of questions from the slide in listserv?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Yes.
Thanks, Monica. Thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Lanika. This is great.